Joining us now, Representative Mo Brooks, who serves on the Armed Services Committee, is a Republican from Alabama, also serves on the Science, Space, and Technology Committee. Good morning to you, sir. Thanks for joining us.
My pleasure, Pedro.
It's been 2 months. A lot has been discussed about the events of January 6th. 2 months later, what do you think was the ultimate cause of the actions of those on the Capitol?
Well, as I've stated since January the 6th, let's not rush to judgment. Let's wait for the investigation to go forward. Certainly, we know a whole lot more now than we knew 2 months ago, and I anticipate we'll know a whole lot more a year from now than we know right now. But to date, it looks like the evidence is pretty strong that there were militant elements from different groups like Proud Boys, perhaps Boogaloo Boys, perhaps Oath Keepers, go down your list, that used the Trump rally as a means, a subterfuge for attacking the United States Capitol. That's what it looks like as of today. It looks like it was planned well in advance. That's the testimony that we're getting in Congress from people associated with law enforcement. And as such, it's pretty clear that the ellipse speeches, quite frankly, had nothing to do with the attack on the Capitol on January 6th, inasmuch as the kind of planning that was initiated for this attack on the Capitol began many days and even weeks before the ellipse speeches.
Those themes came up in that hearing that you probably heard about with the FBI Director Christopher Wray. He was asked about these very similar things. I want to play his response and then get your response to that.
When I look at what happened on January 6th, it appears that right-wing white supremacist groups played an instrumental role in the violent assault. Is that your conclusion also?
Well, let me answer that this way. I think we're basically saying the same thing. I mean, we don't tend to think, we at the FBI don't tend to think of violent extremism in terms of right, left. You know, that's not a spectrum that we look at. What I would say is that it is clear, as I think I said to Chairman Durbin, that a large and growing number of the people that we have arrested so far in connection with the 6th are what we would call militia violent extremism, militia violent extremists, and then there have been some already that have emerged who I would have put in the racially motivated violent extremist bucket, again advocating for the spirit of the white race.
And I understand from your testimony previously that you did not see Antifa or left-wing groups playing a significant role in the January 6th insurrection.
Certainly, while we're equal opportunity and looking for violent extremism of any ideology, we have not to date seen any evidence of anarchist violent extremists or people subscribing to Antifa in connection with the 6th. That doesn't mean we're not looking, and we'll continue to look, but at the moment we have not seen that.
So, Representative Brooks, for all that the FBI director said, what's your reaction to that?
Well, I agree with most of it. I think some clarity is important when we talk about, and you know the questioner was trying to get into this white supremacy kind of thing. From what I understand, out of a couple of hundred arrests so far, less than 5% have been identified as white supremacists, which means 95% or so were not. But that's not to say that white supremacy was not a factor in that. That should be frowned upon. Those people should be punished, as is appropriate under the law. I also very carefully listened to his words about Black Lives Matter and Antifa. I agree that they were not a significant presence, again, based on the investigation to date, keeping in mind things may change, which Ray said that they might. There's one individual, John Sullivan, who claims and who has participated in Black Lives Matter protests, or whatever you want to call them, same thing with fascist Antifa. There's some question from those groups. They tend to reject John Sullivan, although that's not unusual, that an individual who engages in violence is disassociated after the fact from the groups that he claims he's affiliated with. But one on that side, of course, is heavily outweighed by roughly 200 on the other side. So I would agree with Ray that the Black Lives Matter and the Antifa presence to date seems to be relatively insignificant, certainly much less significant than I thought around January the 6th based on the information that I had.
If I recall correctly, you were part of that Stop the Steal event. In hindsight, what about your participation of it? Would you change anything?
Well, we're talking about a rally a mile and a half away that was permitted in many different ways by the First Amendment. Freedom of assembly, freedom of speech, freedom to petition the government with your grievance. So that's a different event from what happened at the United States Capitol. And I'm pleased that the rally at the Ellipse, hours, at least with me speaking, it was hours before the attack on the Capitol, that it was peaceful in all respects as far as I know.
One of those underlying themes that were at that rally, even heard the president reference it Sunday in his speech about the results of the election, Joe Biden's legitimacy as president. To this day, is Joe Biden the legitimate president in your mind?
Joe Biden has been sworn in. He is the President of the United States.
Again, if you want to talk to our guests about these themes, you can call and ask them questions at the lines, 202-748-8000 for Democrats, 202-748-8001 for Republicans, Independents, 202-748-8002. Text us too at 202-748-8003. Representative Brooks, then, when it comes to security at the Capitol, what do you think has to change to prevent these kind of instances from happening again?
Well, I think the one thing about this particular event was the lack of intelligence. If you look at what the then Capitol Police Chief testified to in some of these hearings, we didn't have adequate notification that there were these militant groups that had infiltrated the rally and were hell-bent on engaging in violence at the United States Capitol. So intelligence would have been really beneficial to our law enforcement officers. We could have triggered the National Guard earlier. Perhaps the rules of engagement need to be changed with respect to the Capitol Police officers so that they can be more aggressive in their defense of the United States Capitol. You know, we're really lucky in one respect. If some of the more traditional, suicidal, violent, terrorist groups had been active in taking advantage of what was otherwise supposed to be a peaceful protest, there could have been a significant loss of life. Imagine Al-Qaeda if they had been secreting weapons in the United States Capitol during this event, as opposed to the people who, in fact, entered into the United States Capitol. From what I understand, although, again, the investigations are underway, no one who's been arrested inside the United States Capitol had firearms of any kind. No one who was arrested inside the United States Capitol had any traditional weapons of that sort. They did have apparently bats or batons, which also, if improperly used, couldn't be considered a deadly weapon. So, you know, I don't want to get too much in the details of what is and is not a weapon. A lot of it under the law depends on how it's used. But if you'd had 20 or 30 Al-Qaeda suicidal types in there, it could have been a horrible scene. So I hope that we've learned from this, and we will make sure that the Capitol Police have the authority to use the type of force that is necessary to repeal this kind of attack on the Capitol in the future. I think that's a very, very important lesson that we need to learn.
Is the fencing that's currently